Chris Eubank Jr. nitpicked his way out of a fight with Gennady Golovkin back in the day. I'm sure we all remember that. Whether that was his intention or not, I don't know, but that's what happened. So in steps Kell Brook, who gladly accepts the very same contract Eubank Jr. refused to sign, and he goes ahead and fights Golovkin. After the fight, Eubank was mocking Kell Brook on social media for losing, saying, "We don't have towels in our corner. We don't own towels," in reference to the actions of Dominic Ingle. When Brook went on to quit against Errol Spence, Eubank mocked him again. When Billy Joe Saunders lost to Canelo, Eubank mocked him as well. Eubank Jr. has a history of kicking his rivals when they're down. And then we come to Conor Benn, who he's also been mocking over this PED situation. Then when Eubank loses to Liam Smith, Benn takes the opportunity to fire back. And yet, people are up in arms saying that Benn's a disgrace for defending himself. And for the record, I actually like Eubank Jr. a lot more than Conor Benn as a character. Way more, in fact. I don't actually like Conor Benn as a person at all for various reasons. But I can't allow that to get in the way of my objectivity. And objectively speaking, all this mockery that Eubank Jr.'s been receiving from his rivals was brought on by himself. It never ceases to amaze me how many grown adults find it impossible to wrap their heads around the concept of objectivity. Just because Conor Benn is under investigation, he doesn't automatically lose all rights to defend himself. For example, if you're accused of stealing someone's car, and while the case is still open, that someone comes up and tries to take a swing at you, you're still allowed to defend yourself. There's been no ruling on Conor Benn yet, and the public are not privy to all the evidence. How are you going to condemn someone with 100% certainty when you're not privy to the evidence? This isn't Jarrell Miller, who's been popped 3 or 4 times and served numerous bans. If that was the case here, then my tone would probably be a bit different. But no, this is the first time Conor Benn has ever been investigated, and it's ongoing. So any intelligent, objective person is going to allow due process before coming to any concrete conclusions. The defense of Conor Benn appears to be contamination, and given the fact clomiphene can stay in your system for several weeks, it is possible to get 2 failed tests from 1 contamination, as I understand it. That can happen. And as for how the alleged contamination occurred in the first place, that's the evidence I'm waiting to review, or at the very least, to hear a WBC or preferably a UKAD or British Boxing Board of Control judgment on. But in the meantime, to make it absolutely crystal clear, I am not saying that Conor Benn is innocent. In fact, at this stage, as an outsider looking in, the likelihood appears to be very much the opposite. But that's the point. I'm an outsider looking in, as we all are. We're not privy to all the evidence. Conor Benn has definitely done things which I find very suspicious, such as handing in his boxing license. But that isn't smoking gun proof of guilt. It's suggestive, yes, but it's not proof. For example, when a person is being interviewed by the boys in blue, they're often advised to stay silent and allow their legal representative to speak for them, even if they're innocent. And this is despite the fact that their silence can sometimes be interpreted as a sign of guilt, because most people don't know legalese, they're unfamiliar with the process, and they're often nervous, so they may be advised to say no comment to every question they're asked. Again, even if they're innocent. My point is, things can look one way at the start of an investigation, but look very different by the end of it, when all the evidence comes out. But what we often have in these PED situations is a witch hunt, a baying mob. And the mob is usually impulsive, irrational, and morally incompetent. They're ruled by emotion and not by reason or logic. They're locked into a hive mind, a herd mentality, groupthink. And this subverts the critical thinking processes of the individual, assuming they have any to begin with, because many people don't. This then leads to very poor decision making. They're not interested in due process, either because they're not intelligent enough to understand why it's necessary, or because they actually want the condemned to be guilty, i.e., they're just opportunists looking for an excuse to unleash all their worldly frustrations on someone in an attempt to feel better about themselves. They hate due process because it obstructs or delays gratification. Tyan Booth was actually talking about this the other day in this interview. And he had the honesty to admit that he himself has fallen into this way of thinking regarding Conor Benn, as in wanting him to be guilty. But most people aren't introspective enough to realize that they're doing this. And of those who are, very few are honest enough to admit it to anyone. When they encounter someone who's trying to be objective, they attack them as well. We don't need to see the evidence. He's guilty. String him up. So you don't need to see all the evidence. And then you're going to sit there with a straight face and claim that I'm not being objective. You couldn't make it up. The irony is absolutely staggering. Like I said earlier, a lot of people just cannot comprehend the concept of objectivity. It's like trying to teach an earthworm algebra or something. That's literally what it's like. I've got no issue with people having strong suspicions about Conor Benn, because that's perfectly reasonable given the circumstances. But to condemn him with 100% certainty and attack anyone who isn't equally as certain when we haven't seen all the evidence, that's not reasonable at all. You're just proving yourself to be an imbecile, in fact. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast, where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.